There is a Nova Scotia Nature Trust dinner tonight, which some of our members attend. So this meeting generally is fairly low attended, but it's nice to see so many people here tonight. So thank you very much for coming. Just to give you a little bit of some Bird Society news, I had a list. We have our wine and cheese. If any of you have been to our wine and cheese before, it's worth coming to. So this is going to be on Saturday, November the 17th at 7:30 upstairs in the gallery at the museum here. We have our elections of the directors, and we have a little short, we're trying to get it shorter, business meeting, and then we have our wine and cheese afterwards, and it proves to be a very good night. This time, Alison Stevens, who's looked after our wine and cheese for the last 3 years, has chosen an Italian theme. So Alison, by the way, had a newborn baby not long ago, so she won't be able to be here, but she's given us great directions and what we need and what wines and what cheeses to match, and I think little Italian flags. So we'll have lots of good things for that. So please come if you can. So that's November 17th. In December, we don't have a meeting here at the museum for the Bird Society, but we start up again in January. January, we have John Patterson with the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. He's going to talk about some of the properties that they have here in the province that are significant for birds, as well as the 8 or 9 properties that the Nova Scotia Bird Society donated to them 2 years ago. So there's some information and some news there that he can share, so that should be good in January. In February, Eric Mills, Dr. Eric Mills, who many of you here know, has written a recent book called Audubon in Nova Scotia. And if you know Eric's work, or if you've read his books, this one's quite a good little book. We're going to have a little bit of a book launch for him. He's going to talk a little bit about Audubon's travels here in Nova Scotia and elsewhere, and then we'll have enough books here that people can pick them up and get them to sign them, and it should be kind of nice. We're not sure if we can get wine in for that night, but we'll try, and we'll see what we can do. Wine seems to attract people. So a couple of things. So that gets up to February anyway. We don't have a speaker yet for March or April, but we are planning an out-of-town meeting in June, and we're just toying with the idea of whether it be Yarmouth or in the Digby area prior around. So there's some, we're planning some things for the out-of-town meeting next year. Bridgetown, people may have heard media reports about the chimney swift colony in Bridgetown. And just to kind of bring you up to date, there was the community of Bridgetown decided that they'd like to have some sports fields, which was great. The old school was there that had a chimney that chimney swifts weren't using. And they were going to demolish the school and put these nice sport fields in, which they dearly needed. The community decided that's what they were doing. But just as the plans began to happen, didn't chimney swifts come in last year for the first time ever, and about 500 of them or so came into that chimney last summer, and this is right when demolition of the school was taking place. So they put a halt on the demolition of the Bridgetown, the old school, and what's left right now is a single chimney that is poorly braced. The engineers say that this will not withstand very high winds, and there is some problems with that. So no one knows if these swifts are even going to come back to the chimney, but the government of Nova Scotia and others, we wrote a letter to the federal government as well as the provincial government to ask them to retain the chimney or do something to make sure that it stays around until we find out how significant those chimney swifts, that roost is going to be. So we need to at least find out if they're going to come back this year. So just to let you know that the Bird Society has addressed this, and it has gone to government, and we did get a response this week, and they're very, very concerned about the situation. They are going to look at all avenues of either the chimney as it is a hazard. It's going to fall over and somebody's going to get hurt if they happen to be in the wrong area. So they are hoping that they can either reconstruct that chimney or something like it nearby and integrate it with the community of Bridgetown. So that's the anticipated hope. So we just like to keep you informed about that, because you may see some media reports about what's happening with that particular school demolition project in Bridgetown. We'll keep you posted. Christmas bird counts. December 15th they start. There's 35 of them in the province. We will have a list on our website for people to go to. And I think what we'll probably do is under the events section is have each count listed there if we can fit them all in. As I said, there's 35 of them and they've all got different dates, and people can take part in Christmas counts all over the province if you wish to. It's a lot of fun, and it's a very social kind of game to play. So just to let you know, that starts December 14th and it ends on the January 5th. Talking to you a little bit about memberships. Our memberships have changed a little bit. I think the count was 13 categories of memberships that we had with the Nova Scotia Bird Society last year, which we all thought was pretty crazy, because there was online and there was family memberships and individual and student, and there was, I don't know how many of them. There were international. So we decided that we didn't need those. We have brought it down to just 4. There's a life member, there's a single membership, there's a single membership that you can get a mailed printed copy of the Bird Society magazine, and there's an international mailed one. So anybody, if you're a family, a student, an individual, or even an institution that wants to look at the online magazines, the price is the same. The only difference is if you have to mail it to somebody, if you happen to be in England, it's going to cost more. So we charge more for that membership if you happen to be outside of Canada. So we made it easier, it's simpler to get to, and our memberships have made a lot, I think it makes a lot more sense. And that starts right away. The other change that we made was that if a new member joins the Bird Society today, they've never been a member of the Bird Society ever before, their membership will go 12 months out from today's date to next year at this time. Whereas before, it was January to December. And it was always January to December, no matter when you join. But with the online membership these days, we have people joining all through the year. And if they join in July, they're only getting 5 months worth, and then they've got to repay again. So we've managed to make that change on our website. People can now join for a full 12 months. Ipswich Sparrow Project is near and dear to me, so I'll mention it. There were another 314 Ipswich sparrows banded on Sable Island this year, and those birds are now starting to present themselves along our coastline. And it's just, if people are out birding or if they're out walking on the beach and you happen to see one of these birds' bands, the bands on their legs are really colorful, so you should be able to see them as they, if they even perch for a second, you should be able to see the bands. So it's important to just keep track of the colors on them so that we can report that and find out what the survival rate of these birds are as they make their way from Sable Island to Nova Scotia and further south.
Yeah, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How do you get close enough to a sparrow to band it without it flying off?
To band it, or to?
Yeah, like how do you get close enough to it without it being spooked and flying away from you?
Very, very carefully. Slowly. I find with Ipswich sparrows, first of all, Savannah sparrows are really flighty. They'll take off even at one, like very, very quickly. But Savannah sparrows are bigger and they're slower, and they seem to not be so concerned. So they tend to not fly too far away. Now, there are always exceptions, and if the wind is up, they'll fly further away and you end up losing them. But I do find Ipswich are a little easier to catch. And if you have a camera or a good pair of binoculars that you can tell what the colors are on the left leg, those are the ones that really need if you're out in the field, come, I'll show you.
Okay.
Maybe you
Anytime.
can convince one of the Ipswich banders to come in and tell us their progress, Dave.
Yes, we've had Sydney Bliss in twice already. We had her in twice last year, and I'll no doubt ask her to give us a little quick update, even before our speaker. It's usually not very long that she'll talk, and it will just give you kind of an update. But it's a great project, and because it's one of these birds that only nests here in Nova Scotia, it's important, I think, to us as Nova Scotians to know a little bit about what's happening with that bird. Walkers Feed and Seed, I'll put a plug in for them over in Cole Harbour. They asked us if we would contribute some photos for a poster that they were going to make, and some of our members contributed some photos to it, and they produced this beautiful poster about this big, full size, with all the birds that you would probably find at feeders in Nova Scotia, instead of a generic one that they could have bought from the US or some other place. So they've made it pure Nova Scotia, and really quite attractive. We will have them available at the AGM, and I will bring them in after the AGM as well. But we've sold out completely. We don't have any left. So, and as a matter of fact, walkers, they're just going off the shelves. You can't keep them. He's just so excited about it. So he said they're, I think, $4.99. They're very heavy laminate posters. Very, very nice. They can be given as gifts. That is it, except Tony made a little sign for us for our coloring books. We have coloring books and hats at back. The books here are free for the taking. Please stay afterwards for your coffee and juice if you wish. And there's a few cookies there, I think, thanks to Jennifer. And apart from that, I think we need to introduce our speaker. Jason Dane, many of you have heard that name, and anybody that's on our Facebook page have probably seen his photographs. But Jason is here tonight. He is a global product manager for Trimble Navigation Limited in the forestry division. In that role, he works to direct the global product roadmap for the division and works to design software to assist forest managers around the world to better manage their forestry industry or the forestry businesses. Jason grew up in Ottawa, always in the outdoors growing up, especially enjoying the swamps here and along the Ottawa River. And his interest is in all things natural. He graduated from the forestry program at Lakehead University, which eventually brought him here to Nova Scotia, applying his skills and knowledge to the forestry industry. In 2015, it's only 3 years ago, Jason took the leap and bought a digital camera to record a few birds he was seeing during his travels. With that job, he travels to many, many countries, so he, I think, was looking for an outlet. After his talks, he'd find something else to do, and birding tended, or at least photography was starting to bloom. So after a close encounter with an eagle on Highway 102, he said that he seriously began to use his camera and his passion for the outdoors to immerse himself very enthusiastically into birding. The Nova Scotia Bird Society, and significantly contributing to our birding knowledge here. Jason is an active NSBS society, member and helps administer our 12,000 member Facebook page, as well as he writes sections for our quarterly magazine, and he certainly contributing a lot to the photography skills of people and very generously sharing his abilities to others like me. Jason has used his extensive work travels and opportunities to bird around the world, and he'll share some of those experiences here tonight. So welcome, Jason. Thank you very much.
Dave.
All right, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Dave. I'm just going to try turning on this mic and see. Does that too loud, or does that work? Okay. Hopefully that will make it easier for the people on the video to hear me. So as Dave says, I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown of some of my experiences traveling around the world. Give some travel tips in terms of how I go about getting myself set up to go somewhere and bird, and do some work on the side. And then I've just got a number of pictures, and I'm going to use those pictures to kind of illustrate some of the lessons that I've learned over the past few years. So we'll get started with a bit of an outline. So I'm going to start off with a bit of an introduction. I'll try to cut it short because Dave pretty much said most of it. I'll do this logically in terms of planning a trip, getting ready for the trip, what to do during your trip, what to do after your trip, and then finally some photos and stories. So it's going to be a little bit of death by PowerPoint for the first bit, but then we'll get into a little more exciting photos that are not taken in Nova Scotia and do violate the rules of our Facebook page, but we'll let that be for today. So since I'm a geomatics guy, I had to start off with a map. So the map, each of the blue pins represents somewhere in the world that I've birded. As you can see, I've done a lot in North America, some in South America, the European and Africa, and then Australia and New Zealand. Now, my birding adventures typically take me to places where there's trees, unless I'm at a conference in a city somewhere, and I still manage to find somewhere to go birding. So I've enjoyed the outdoors my whole life. As a kid, I read a book called My Side of the Mountain, about a little kid that runs away from his house in New York and goes and escapes to the Catskills and lives in the hollowed out tree, and catches a peregrine falcon that he names Frightful. That was my favorite book. I read it 100 times. I've read it to my kids have read it 100 times. So that's kind of when I got the bug, and spent my whole life out in the woods, running around as Dave said, along the Ottawa River where I grew up. So that kind of led me to study forest management, because I figured that would get me out in the woods. That lasted about 10 months. Then they stuck me in the office, and I never got to go outside again. So that'll teach you to go to university. But anyway, so in the autumn of 2015, on my way to my mother-in-law's house in New Brunswick, we came across a bald eagle in a tree just by the Enfield exit, and pulled over on the side of the highway, and I took a bunch of pictures of it that, by my standards now, were horrible, but that totally blew me away that I'd never seen an eagle that close before. And then my quest was to see eagles, and then it just blew up from there. So at this point, my world list is at 788 species. My Nova Scotia list is at 299. I've probably gotten half of those world list species this year alone, just from some of the trips that I've been on. So in my career, I've logged over 850,000 air miles, and that's just with Air Canada. I'm not sure about other airlines, but I predominantly fly Star Alliance, so that equates to about 20 times around the world. If I can get to 1 million, then I'll have status for the rest of my life. So well, I'm going to retire when I get there, but which actually shouldn't. I should probably get there within 2 years at my current pace. So I've got 80,000 just this year alone. So 5 countries and travel within Canada. So I enjoy birding and photography. So it just depends on the day whether I'm birding or I'm photographer. So I know there's kind of a spectrum of people that just take pictures of animals and don't really, get interested in the science behind it. And then there's days where I don't even bring my camera. So I'm, a broad spectrum birder / photographer. So we'll get into planning your trip. So, if you want to have good execution, you got to have a good plan. I spent a lot of years managing projects, so I kind of treat every birding trip like a project. So it starts off with a good plan. So in this case, inviting woodpeckers onto Noah's Ark was not a good idea. So usually my trips are planned for me, so I don't get a lot of choice in where I'm going, unless I'm going on vacation or something. So what I usually do is I'll extend the time that I'm there, or I'll extend the place. So if I'm already, for example, I'm going to Las Vegas for a conference, I'll go to the Grand Canyon, which is a 3 or 4 hour drive away. So I'll try to find something, kind of central to where I'm going, but still, gets me out. So I haven't actually done a dedicated birding trip outside the province anywhere, but I'd like to at some point. Just have to convince my wife. So there's lots of places in the world to go birding, like Costa Rica, the Galapagos, those are all great places. So there's lots of people in the province that have gone to those places and would have good ideas on where to go. eBird is a great resource to help you find species that you might be interested in. And there's lots of online resources for travel companies that provide birding tours, which, based on what I've read, can be a really good experience. But for this presentation, I'm going to focus on, you already have a location in mind, what do you do? Because I could just talk for the 45 minutes or an hour on finding a company or finding a place, so I needed to scope it down. So when you're planning your trip, safety is number one priority. So vaccinations may be required depending on where you're going. So, I have a travel doctor. He's down on Quinpool Road. Might have moved, but I just tell him where I'm going and how long I'm going to be there, and whether I'm going out in the wild or not. And he tells me which vaccines I need. And for me, I expense it for work, but it can get quite expensive. One trip to Brazil cost me $600 in vaccinations because of the different things that they've got going on down there. So there's some pretty nasty stuff out there, so always do this. You want to check your destination for any weather, political, or other kinds of issues. So there's certain places in the world that might be really exciting birding but are politically unstable. Central America, for example. Or there may be hurricanes or tornadoes or monsoons or any other kind of weather that you want to watch out for. The Government of Canada has a really good site about each country and what you might expect to see there in terms of religion, culture, any kind of threats. So I always kind of check that before I go somewhere. If you're driving, make sure you stay on the wrong side of the road or the right, depending on where you go. Most countries don't need driver's licenses, but it's good to check. I always score myself on how many times I turn the windshield wipers on instead of the turn signal, or get in the wrong side of the car, which I've done many times, with the keys in hand and no steering wheel in front of me. So you always need to make sure there's nobody else around when you get out of the passenger side and get in the driver's side, because it's really embarrassing. And then ensure that you have travel, medical, and property insurance. So our healthcare is great here, but it's not so great other places, so make sure that you have the appropriate coverage. Obviously, you need to have the appropriate documentation, so make sure your passport's valid 6 months beyond your expected return date. So, some people think that it's, as long as you're covered when you leave, you're fine, but it's not. Better to be safe than sorry. And I've seen people turned away at the airport because their passport was kind of expiring-ish, so better not to give them an excuse. Some countries require travel visas, so there's an ETA, which is one that's used a lot. You either have to go online and fill out a form or something like that. You can do it in advance on the computer. It saves you some time. And some countries require you to actually send your passport to a consulate. I've actually had to travel Toronto with my passport, stay in a hotel overnight, get them to do their business, and then fly home so I could go somewhere. So it really, some countries, like this was Brazil, and Brazil's got a big hate on for Canada because of the whole Embraer, Bombardier thing. So they make it really difficult for Canadians to go down there. So just do your homework and make sure you're covered. We've had people turned around at the airport because they weren't, didn't have the appropriate documentation. So. Internet can be a challenge. It can be expensive. It can be unusable in cases. If you do any amount of travel like I do, I just buy local SIM cards. I have an old iPhone that I use as a hotspot, so I put the SIM card in it, turn on the personal hotspot, and that's my internet. You can also use cafes and restaurants. I park in front of McDonald's in Australia all the time because they have free internet. Or you'll pay $30 a night for it at a hotel, and it's like worse than dial-up. So it's criminal. Different countries have different rules for prescription or non-prescription medications. So bring anything that you might need and more. So, if you're going to run out of pills on your last day of travel, go get them refilled and bring a week extra, because you just never know. You could get screwed up because of weather. They had a volcano erupt in Australia one time, or in Chile when I was there, and I got stuck there for a week. because the ash cloud was going across the Pacific and the planes couldn't fly through it. So, you got to be ready for anything. And decongestants are not over the counter in Scandinavia. So I was there in December at cold, and seriously, without going to see a doctor, I couldn't get a decongestant. It was brutal. So, cough drops and no nasal spray, sure, but it's like I want to get it like an Advil cold or something, no go. So really weird rules, are really strange to us in different countries. You can't get Tylenol in the UK. They have Panadol or Paracetamol or some weird thing that, so just bring your own normal stuff so you don't get surprised. So there's really two major types of trips you can plan for, guided or self-guided. We'll talk a little bit about guided trips. I usually opt for these when I'm in a new area or I have limited time and I want to maximize my birding. So I usually use Google, Facebook, TripAdvisor, birder friends, birding groups that I found on the internet to find a good guide. Once you've narrowed it down, check your references. So I'll usually email somebody else or two people that have gone with them to make sure they're all on the up and up and they're not going to rob me when I get there. And make sure that you agree on cost and time frame of the trip. Make sure there's no surprises or no extras. They kind of got you in a captive situation, so you want to make sure everything's on the up and up and you don't get caught. Again, from my project management background, I'm very risk averse, so some of this stuff may seem overkill, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So one of the great things about guided trips is exclusive access. I was in Chile and I hired a guide for $100 American a day, which is nothing. I couldn't even get a taxi downtown and back for that. So we drove up to this huge oil refinery on the coast, and in a little Toyota Tercel, there's all these trucks and machinery and equipment, and the security guy just kind of waved us in. We drove all the way through the back of this refinery to the coast, and there was this great big marsh. We walked around that for a couple hours and saw all kinds of great birds, and wouldn't have had any clue as just a normal person that this place even existed or was available. So he had obviously paid off the security guy at the gate and got to have this private great experience. And this is a many-colored rush tyrant, which is a pretty cool bird in Chile that I got to see on that day. So self-guided trips. So I end up doing these probably more often than the guided trips, but if I'm going somewhere for the second or third time, I'll end up going for the self-guided option. Again, I'll use eBird or whatever their local equivalent is. So eBird's a great tool, but a lot of countries have their own version of it. Like in Finland, it's called Turn in Finnish, and nobody in Finland uses eBird. They all use this thing called Turn, and it's all in Finnish, and it's completely useless unless you speak Finnish. So the only people that actually use eBird in Finland are tourists. So it can be somewhat helpful, but not really good. So then, you can review checklists to find out what and where people are seeing stuff. Local contacts in Nova Scotia can be also helpful. So if you're going somewhere that people have been before, they can help you with making contacts with people or places. And then also, I'm a digital guy, so I like things electronic. But I found that when I'm traveling somewhere, it's really nice to have a book to reference, to have with me, because basically every species you're seeing you haven't seen before. So I usually take photos of everything and then cross-reference them with a book in my hotel and figure out what things are. And it's really useful. So again, just on the theme of consulting with others, when I was going to Australia in May.
Okay.
So when I was going to Australia in May, I had done some research and found a place called Kangaroo Island that had little penguins, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to go see these guys? But I did some research and I found out that they basically have a grandstand on the beach, and everybody gets in the grandstand at dusk, and the penguins waddle up onto the beach, and they send everybody home. And you're not allowed to take pictures, no cameras, no flashes, nothing. And I thought, well, I'm not going to drive 90 minutes out of my way to sit in the grandstand, and watch these things crawl up on the beach in the dark. So as it turns out, in conversation with Mark Dennis, he said that there was a place much closer, less regulated, but still regulated, that you could go see these things and get up close and personal with them. So, I went to this place in St. Kilda, stood out on the wharf, and 7:30, about a half an hour before dusk, these things that looked like mirrors started swimming in, and then they all started climbing up onto the breakwater. And I had gone to an army surplus store and bought a red plastic shield for my flash on my camera, which I was allowed to use with the red shield on it, because it turns out that penguins have a very sensitive light spectrum. When they're down deep, there's not a lot of light, so they're very, very sensitive to white light, but they're not as sensitive to red light, so you can use that to light them up. So I took this picture in the dark with my camera, with a flash, with a red cover on it, and then fixed the color balance in Photoshop and ended up with a really good picture. And they were clucking away and singing and making sounds, and it was quite loud, actually. It was pretty impressive. So preparing for your trip. So this isn't my stuff, but it looks kind of like my bed does before I travel. Just in terms of having OCD like I do, I kind of like to make sure visually that I have everything that I'm going to need. So when you're preparing, check the weather for your trip dates, pack for the best and pack for the worst. So make sure you've got broad coverage, and make sure you've got layers. Waterproof, windproof, and then a thermal. And so bring comfy, broken in, and waterproof footwear. So the time to try on new boots is not on a trip. So you want to make sure you've got Old Faithful with you. If you've got new boots, break them in at home. Because the one thing that's going to ruin a trip pretty quickly when you're birding is having sore feet. So my rule when I travel is carry on only, but that's not always possible. I don't have to worry about shampoo or any kind of hair products, so that leaves me extra room for my clothes. But if you have to check a bag, don't put lithium batteries in your bag. Most carriers won't let you anyway, because they'll catch fire. They like to catch fire, and that's not a good thing at 30,000 feet in a sealed culvert. Bring a change of clothes and any essentials in your carry-on. So airlines lose bags, airlines misplace bags, airlines do all kinds of things with your bags. I've waited as much as 5 days on a trip to get my suitcase when I've checked the bag, so that's hence the no carry, or they always carry on rule. So if you do, have a change of clothes in your carry-on, and be prepared to go shopping. Scope out some clothing stores nearby where you're staying, just in case, like you have a meeting the next morning and you have to go to Walmart at 11 o'clock to get some clothes because your bag didn't make it. But that's, anyway. So never, ever camera or optics in your check bag. Airlines like to throw things around. They like to drop things. So if you're going to do it, a Pelican type hard case with a lot of foam in it, like for a lens or for a scope, would be a must. But even then, I still wouldn't do it. So I've packed my scope, my camera, and my binoculars in my carry-ons and been fine. It's just safer that way. So my typical birding kit, I'll bring a camera body, sometimes two, depending on where I'm going. I usually bring a wide angle, a medium zoom, and I have a big prime lens that I'll bring with me, but sometimes I'll leave it home just to have the flexibility. Sometimes I'll bring a tripod if I'm going to be doing sea watching or someplace where I'm static. Lens wipes and a sensor cleaner, depending on where you are. You could be in a dusty environment. You could need that. Extra batteries and a charger. Believe it or not, everybody in the world doesn't use the same kind of plugs that we do. So you got to get a power adapter, and usually you can get them wherever you're going, but sometimes you can get them here. They're usually $5 or $10, and a little white doohickey that, I've got a whole box of them at home from all the places I've been. And I always end up forgetting to bring them and buying another one, so I have a collection of them. Binoculars. Scope is a bit of a tricky one. I haven't actually brought my scope with me on a trip. But if I was gonna be doing anything where I was gonna be sea watching or something like that, I would bring it, but it's just an extra headache to, and then you gotta bring a tripod. I like to bring a phone charging battery. You never know where you're gonna be and when your phone's gonna die, so I have a little, battery, external battery that'll charge my phone 5 times. So I usually bring that with me. It's no bigger than my phone is, so doesn't take a lot of space. And then I'll bring a phone app for birding or a local bird ID book for where I'm going. So you want to protect your gear. So pack your camera bodies without the lens. Put the front cover on. Put the lens in a padded bag. And the reason I say that is because when your lens is on your camera, it's like a fulcrum. So there's a lot more leverage to twist that or to break your mount. So by not having the camera lens on, you sort of take that opportunity away. Because people on planes like to smash their suitcases into the carry-on, even if there's a 1/4 of an inch of space, they're going to try and get their bag in there, especially when they're the last one on. So I've broken laptops, all kinds of times over the years from people just jamming stuff in. So for longer lenses, use a travel case, and I've set an example, but I forgot to bring it, but I have a foam, it's like a foam rectangular thing that my lens goes in, and it's like 1 inch of foam all the way around, and it has my camera body and lens all together and keeps everything safe. And if you haven't already, insure your gear. So I have my camera and lens and binoculars and scope and everything separately, specifically insured. So if they get damaged, then I have a small deductible so that I'm not getting burnt. So we'll talk a little bit about a guided trip. So when you're going on a guided trip, the best way to get your expectations met is to set them properly. So make sure your guide knows what your target species are, what type of habitat you want to see. Let them know about any dietary restrictions. Most guides that I've been with will bring food, or they'll take you out when you're out. So making sure they know, if you're gluten sensitive, to not take you to a pizza place or, something like that. Make sure your guide knows if you have any time constraints, if you have to catch a flight or you have a meeting or whatever, so that they can work that into their schedule. So sometimes they may, if they didn't know what your constraints are, they might go further afield than what you have time to do. So make sure they know about those. And then bring cash for payment and tip if you get good service. So on a self-guided trip, make sure you have local currency, as a lot of times credit cards won't work in rural areas, and if you're stuck in the side of the road and you need a boost or you need a tow, cash talks, credit cards don't. Bring food and drink for the time you're away, because a lot of the times either stores aren't open or there might not be any. And some countries are a lot less structured than we are in terms of opening hours. So just because it's the middle of the day doesn't mean that they're going to be open. So you got to plan for the worst. If you're using digital maps, like on your phone, make sure that you've got proper charge and a backup. Otherwise, bring a paper map. So belt and braces. You don't want to get stuck out in the middle of nowhere with no map and you can't read the road signs. It's just not fun. And again, I keep harping on this. Be conservative. Don't push your vehicle places that you shouldn't. Don't drive by gas stations on 1/4 of a tank, or take unnecessary risks walking across what you think might be a frozen bog, or put yourself into a situation. You're in a strange country with strange cultures, and you don't want to be doing things that could get you into trouble. One time when I was in Australia, we went out after work to go see this old growth eucalyptus forest that was supposed to be fantastic. We were in this, Australian version of a Toyota pickup, which is called a Hilux, and we were driving down, and the guy we were with said, "Oh yeah, we'll go down this road," and I basically, I've worked in the woods for a lot of years, driven around in the woods a lot. I said, "If we go down that road, we're sleeping here tonight." And he goes, "No, it's fine, it's fine." We slid all the way down the road and smashed into a tree at the bottom. And we were in the bottom of a gully with no cell service. It was getting dark. There's snakes. There's all kinds of bad stuff. And we didn't get home till 2 a.m. We had to, we basically had to walk 2 hours to the top of the hill to get cell reception, to get somebody to come get us. And anyway, long story. But that's the kind of stuff that happens, and luckily we had contacts and somebody that could actually come get us. But if you don't know anybody, it makes it that much harder. So during your trip, go bird. Obviously that might be what you're there to do. So get out and bird as much as you can. Enjoy the food, the culture, the scenery, and other wildlife while you're at it. So this is a good opportunity to live a little. So foods, art, science, or art, culture. Get out and experience where you're at, not just the birds. Make sure you wear sunscreen. A hat for me is critical. A sunburned head is no fun at all. Bring water and snacks. Don't be a hangry birder. It's trying to get that last tick for the day when you're hungry can make things very frustrating. So always bring snacks. And be discreet in public places with your gear. I learned this lesson in South Africa. I was in Johannesburg, which is not the safest of towns. And I didn't think it would be very smart to bring my big lens out to the park to go birding. So I brought a smaller one. And a police officer pulled over to the side of the road, got out of his car and said, you should put that camera in a bag or something, because if somebody, with the wrong intentions sees you with that, it's gone. You're gone. Not a good situation. So, some of these countries are their economies aren't good. Poverty is high. It can be, walking around with a several $1,000 camera is just an imitation. So keep it covered if you can. If you're out in the jungle or something, it's less of a problem. But in public places, it's best to be discreet. Again, talking about risk aversion, I saw this sign in the Werribee water treatment place in Melbourne. Walked into this bird hide, and there's this sign. I just burst out laughing when I read it because I couldn't believe how funny it was. So luckily it was the winter there, so there was no snakes around, but you can well imagine walking into a bird hide and there being a poisonous snake. It's just not something we're used to. So safety first. And that's not just for snakes, so there's insects, there's wild animals. You just got to watch out. So learn from others. When you're away, the world's a big place, and people have come up with solutions to problems that we face here at home. So this was a nesting beach for hooded plovers, which are endangered in Australia, and they're very protective. So they actually had people walking, conservation people walking on the beach, talking to people about their dogs, and we're actually patrolling the beaches past this point to make sure there wasn't any dogs at all, regardless about on the leash. So this is something that I'd like to see here, especially on beaches that are for piping plovers. But maybe that's something we can work on. So be prepared. So I have a thing for raptors, as you might have known. So always have your head on a swivel. I was driving along the road with my guide, or he was driving and I was watching, and I'd wanted to see a wedge-tailed eagle. And as we were driving along, I spotted a pair of them flying over a field. He did a quick Yui in a funny place called, it's spelled Geelong, which sounds like it should say Geelong, but it's Geelong. The G is soft anyway. Funny. So anyway, we ran down the side of this field and saw the wedge-tailed eagles, and I was a happy camper. So you always got to be watching, but if you're driving, focus on the road, which I know we all do. We're very focused. Not looking for birds on posts or anything like that. All right. So after your trip, this is Lightroom, which I use for processing photos, and this was a photo I just took a screenshot from my computer from a Newfoundland trip. So we got gray jays, puffins, and a pipit in Bonavista. Vista. So after your trip, so make sure your gear's clean, ready to be put away. So if you have any boots or hiking equipment or tents or anything like that, you don't want to put them away wet, or you don't want to put them away with dirt on them or other things, because that can eat away at the coatings and that. If you've damaged any of your equipment, so sometimes you might you need to send things away or do any repairs, make sure everything's ready for the next time. In terms of photos, if you do shoot raw like I do, you need to do your processing, which I usually can't help myself, and I do it on the road because I want to see what I got. Review your photos and keep your keepers and delete your ones that you want to delete. I've gotten into the habit of annotating photos for new species. So I go in Lightroom, you can actually put a keyword on the photo with the species name. So for the first shot of a new species, I'll put that on there. So as I'm going back and saying, well, what is that? I always, if I have multiple pictures, I'll just annotate the first one. So as I'm identifying them, I just right click on it and say add keyword and put the species name in. And I find that helpful because, I have a good memory, but it's really short. And again, on the belt and braces theme, I back up my photos to a local hard drive that's not my computer, and I back them up to OneDrive, which is an online hosted thing. So if my laptop fails, I have my backup on a separate drive. If my backup and my separate drive fails, I still have them online. Hard drives are designed to fail, so they will fail. It's just a matter of when. So be prepared. After your trip, maintain your relationships with the guides or people you connect with. So over the years, the people that I've gone birding with internationally as guides, I've actually stayed in contact with on Facebook, on Instagram, and I've actually made return trips where they haven't even charged me. They just take me out and return the favor when they come here. So it's really good. The last time I was in Finland, I paid a guy 300 euros a day to take me out, which was pretty rich, but got to see some cool stuff. When I was there the next time, he's at the end of the 2 days, he said, whenever you come back, we'll just go. So the last time I was there, he spent the whole weekend with me. I basically paid for his gas and his meals. Not that he asked for that, but I just did it, and spent the whole weekend with me and didn't charge me a penny. So, making those connections and keeping them going is important, I find. So you want to share your photos on Nova Scotia birders around the world. So this is a Facebook group that I started over the summer, kind of in response to people posting pictures from away from Nova Scotia on the bird.
There we go.
Okay. On the theme of being prepared, I brought an extra battery just so that. I didn't expect it to run out that quickly, but it did. Okay, we'll carry on. So January 2016, I took my first work trip to Ireland. This was actually my second birding trip that I actually gone somewhere purposely to go birding. My first trip was a few weeks previous, was down to go to Cape Sable Island, because that was like, to a new birder, that's like, the ultimate place to go. So I had in my mind that I'd drive down there, see a snowy owl at Back Row Point, and see all kinds of cool stuff, but I was completely unprepared, didn't see a snowy owl. Saw some neat stuff on Cape Sable Island, but at that point I still didn't even have binoculars, so I was still pretty new. So anyway, the lesson here is be prepared. So when I got out of the airport, I got into my rental car, which in this case it was a standard transmission, shift with your left hand, 3 pedals, just wrong side of the road. Yeah, you really got to watch. I mean, not a big deal for Tony, but when you have to bad enough you're on the wrong side of the road. If you got to think about shifting in the winter, it's even worse. But anyway, so I wanted to have all my camera stuff ready just in case. And as soon as I pulled out of the airport onto the motorway, there's this raptor flying alongside the road. So I quickly pulled over on the left and jumped out of the car and got a picture of a common buzzard, which looks a lot like our red-tailed hawk, which was kind of cool because that was one that I wanted to see. So the place that I went to was I think it was the Richardson Estuary. So there was a whole bunch of Eurasian species, and one of them was a common redshank. So one of the things that I learned when I was birding in Europe was that all the species are common something, which makes it kind of tough for us to come up with names because everything over there is common this or common that, and we have to come up with something else. So that's kind of boring. But anyhow, and actually it was kind of funny going back and looking at my photos from that trip. I realized how much that I had learned since then, because I had Eurasian teals and what was the other species? Anyway, there was 2 duck species in a photo, and I went back and looked at it later and said, oh, there's actually 2 species in that photo, and I ended up adding one to my list just by looking. And then there was another photo that I had that I thought was a purple sandpiper, but it was a ruddy turnstone, and it was actually both species. So I had recorded it as a purple sandpiper, but it was a ruddy turnstone, and all you could see was the beak of the purple sandpiper behind it, and I had it totally wrong. And I was like, anyway. It was quite funny to go back and look at my first trip and how much ID practice that I had needed. So this was one that I took in Killarney National Park in Ireland. It was a white-throated dipper. It was foraging along the river. I'm going to butcher this, Dina, in the park, feeding 2 young. So there was these 2 little dippers literally dipping, going like this on their legs, like, waiting for their parent to come back with food. And it was quite fun to watch, because this little thing would fly along, land on a rock, and literally jump into the water and run along the bottom of the stream, catching insects or larvae in the water. And then it would burst out of the water, fly over to the little ones. The little ones would go like, with their mouth open. It would feed them, and it would flip around and go back in the water. So it's the only songbird in the world that actually forages for food in the water. It's kind of cool. So when you're traveling, sometimes habitat makes the shot. So this was in Mississippi, so in a cypress bog. These little things are called cypress knees. So this was at a place I found an eBird that was a yellow-crowned night heron rookery. So there was like 60 of them and all kinds of young ones. But anyway, cypress trees live in flooded areas, so they can't respire like normal trees can through the roots. So they send up these things called knees that are like snorkels. That's how they breathe. So all these little bumps that you're seeing are snorkels, effectively, for the cypress trees. And then the yellow-crowned night heron was amongst them, so that was cool. And then another shot that I had that I liked a lot was the Spanish moss hanging off the trees with a red-headed woodpecker hanging out of it. But anyway, so yeah, just sometimes habitat can make the shot. The bird's nice too, but the bird in its habitat is kind of nice. So again, have your camera out whenever you're not stopping somewhere. So I was driving down the road back to my hotel from this park, and there was a black vulture sitting on a telephone post, on the interstate. So I pulled over to the side of the road, pulled out my camera, and got a lifer. So that's kind of cool. So it's kind of a funny story. It's just a bald eagle, but I like bald eagles. But I was walking along the seawall in Stanley Park in Vancouver, and everybody was throngs of people watching these 3 humpback whales coming in English Bay. And so I was obviously interested, and they were coming up and feeding, and that was great. And then I, from a distance, saw this bald eagle flying in. So of course there's 100 people looking that way, and there's me looking this way, taking the picture as the bald eagle flew over. So, I kind of lost interest in the whales after seeing this thing fly by, and it was great light, and it's a nice pose and everything. So could have used a little more shutter speed, but anyway. So one of the downsides of traveling outside of Nova Scotia is you see species quite easily in places that you don't easily find here. So we were at the Bronx Zoo. We went down to New York State to see the Belmont Stakes horse race. My daughter loves horses, so we drove down to see the Belmont, and we went to the Bronx Zoo, and there's this little marsh in front of the Bronx Zoo where there's all these birds, and this black-crowned night heron was 20 feet away, sitting there, and I got a great photo of it. But it wasn't until this summer on an island on the Plaget with Ronnie D'Entremont and the gang that I actually saw one in Nova Scotia. So it was 2 years pretty much to the day that I had to wait to see one here. Caspian terns like that too. I saw one. I've seen one pretty much everywhere that I've gone, but never saw one here until I was out with Dave and Jim Edsel one morning, and 2 of them flew over us. at Heartland Point. So, so this is a funny story. So sometimes the best laid plans just don't work out. So I was talking to some folks at this place called the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Area in New York, just by Kennedy Airport, and they told me about this barn owl nesting box. So wouldn't that be great to get a barn owl? So I got up really early, went out to the little bird hide, and I sat in the bird hide for 2 hours waiting for this owl to come out, and it just would not come. So I jiggled with my camera settings, and and all I got was his eyebrows. But I got enough to call it. So,
That's not enough.
what's that?
That's not enough.
Oh. Anyway, so I hope to get a better shot of one someday, but I'll take the, I'll take it. Yeah, I think it's probably an immature in the box and the adult was somewhere, but anyway, it doesn't matter. It was still kind of funny. I came home from, my wife said, "How'd you do?" And I said, "Well, I got the eyebrows." So Atlantic Canada has some great birding opportunities, so you don't have to go very far. So just over the border, I've been there several times to the Tantramar Marshes and the Sackville Waterfowl Park. It's the short-eared owls that breed out there on the marshes that you can go, and I think August is probably the best time to see them there, but every evening they're out hunting, and especially when they're haying the fields. They seem to be getting all the dead mice that the hay mowers catch, so that's a pretty dependable time. So that's when I took that photo. Newfoundland is obviously an amazing place to go birding. I've been there birding just the once, but I've been there lots of times and really like it. So this is kind of a funny story. So also in Atlantic Canada, this is an American three-toed woodpecker in Terra Nova National Park. So we had walked for a couple hours with the kids, and they decided to take a break, and I said, well, there's this big old spruce stand that I can see on the aerial photo that I'd like to go take a walk in. So I wandered off on my own and ran into some gray jays, which was kind of fun, and then I ran into these two woodpeckers. And I thought, wow, this is a black-backed woodpecker. How cool is that? We see them here, but not very often. And so I was happy with myself, and I got back to the hotel, and I posted the picture on the Newfoundland birding site and caused quite a stir because they corrected my wrong ID of so that was like the only one that had been seen in the province all year. So lucky me. But it wasn't a lifer. I'd seen them in Alberta, but I didn't get a really good shot. I was quite happy with, and they were not shy at all. They were very close. So when you're traveling, it's easy to get wrapped up in the birds and miss the surroundings. So one of the places that I go a lot is in Montana, near Glacier National Park. So I was out looking for hawk owls one night, and I went across this bridge, and this scene was unfolding beside me, so I kind of stopped what I was doing and took a photo and carried on. Didn't see a hawk owl, but just remember that there's other interesting things and that make for good memories. So one of the other things that I kind of, because I like raptors a lot, one of the things that I'll do whenever I'm going somewhere is look in the yellow pages or online for like Hope for Wildlife or Cobequid Wildlife Recovery. Try and find one of those places and give them a call and to see if I can drop in. So I actually got to know the guys in Montana quite well. So they would let me come visit and see their birds that were for education purposes and the birds that were recovering. So, having a golden eagle sitting on your arms, just about crushing your forearm with its talons, is an experience. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is this pygmy owl. So that's actually my finger that it's on. The thing was, 4 inches tall. And the guy there, I forget his name now, but he had a really good description of pygmy owls. This is they got a submachine gun under one jacket side and then a machete under the other. And they'll take down birds 2 or 3 times their size. They're quite vicious, even though they're very small. So they're an exciting little bird. One that I hope to see in the wild, haven't seen yet, but they're quite cute. So again, it can be beneficial to look around urban places to bird. So again, I got dragged to Las Vegas for this conference. Had no desire to go, but I decided to make the best of it and found a couple places to go birding, which was the Henderson Bird Viewing Preserve, which was really amazing. Got 30 lifers in one trip over. Obviously I was a new birder, so it was quite easy to get them, but there was a lot of great birds. And then I also went to the Grand Canyon and saw some neat stuff there. So this is a white-faced ibis in winter plumage. So in the Grand Canyon, you know, this was a 4-hour drive away, but I decided, you know, what the heck. Stayed an extra day, got up early, made the trip, got to see some neat stuff like Woodhouse's scrub jay and canyon wren and western bluebird and those kinds of things. So kind of funny that canyon wren in the Grand Canyon. This is a Peruvian pelican. So in Chile, I was there for I had to be there for a Friday meeting and then a Monday meeting, so obviously I had the 2 days of the weekend to bird, so I had the guide. So Saturday was a really nice day, it was sunny, it was hot, we got to see some neat stuff. I said to the guide, I said, it'd be really cool if we could get some of these big birds like vultures and things to be closer to the ground to get better photos, and he's like, wait till tomorrow, you'll get them. And I was like, well, why is that? And he goes, well, there's a low pressure system coming in, and all the birds are going to be grounded tomorrow. And I was like, what? And so he said, yeah, the big birds, you know, they obviously count on the differential in air pressure created by their wings to fly, so they actually find it harder to fly in poorer weather, and he said they'll all be on the ground. Ah, you're full of it. You know, I didn't believe him. It sounded good, but I just said, no, there's no way. Anyway, the next day we went out, and all the pelicans were sitting on the wharf, all the vultures were sitting on the rocks, all the raptors were on telephone posts, nothing was flying. And I was like, either this guy's really good or he's full of it. But anyway, got to see a pelican. So I've kind of watched that over the years here, and it works pretty good. You know, you'll notice different bird behaviors on different weather systems and things like that. So having local knowledge is key. So in this case, there's a guy here in Nova Scotia, Paul Turbot, who used to live in Alberta. I think he's Turbo Track and Tours, or I forget what name he's got now, but it's not his real name. Anyway, he told me, you know, an hour south of Calgary, you want to see great gray owls, go down this road, you'll find them. Tennessee warbler, three-toed woodpecker, western tanager, and great gray owls. So I said, okay, Plumbers Road, here I go. I literally turned off the highway, drove in 100 feet, and there was this great gray owl sitting on a fence post. So I was like, okay, that was easy. And for this species in particular, eBird has the 20-kilometer square, so they don't actually give the exact locations to prevent them from being harassed, because they are so, you know, what's the word? They don't care about humans. They just go about their business, so they don't want people harassing them, so they obfuscate their locations in eBird. So anyway, it was nice to know exactly where to go. And then to be able to pass that information on and help others is nice as well. So Ronnie D'Entremont went out this summer, and I told him what I had learned, and he then saw them in a similar spot, so it's, you know, always good. Target species in eBird, I don't know if anybody knows about it, but I always use it. So I basically type in where I'm going, when I'm going, and whether I want it for a year list or a life list, and it will basically give you a map of where that species is, and, you know, give you all the species that you haven't seen already. So I use that a lot. So when I was going to Montana, I was always in the Intermountain, so I was in a valley surrounded by 10,000-foot peaks, and it was very kind of certain habitat types, so there wasn't other stuff. But about 3 hours away was the high prairie, so I decided to just plunk a point in the map and say, I'm going to go here and see what I can get. So I plugged in the spot in eBird, and it told me about Say's phoebe, western kingbird, ferruginous hawk, and, you know, there they were. They were all just kind of, I mean, I had to find them, but this, you know, it's quite good intel to be able to locate them. So changing your habitat's going to change your bird species. So, and I think ferruginous hawks are the biggest buteo species. But anyway, they're awesome. So this is a northern hawk owl. I got it in Helsinki, Finland, this winter. But hopefully we'll get one here in Nova Scotia this winter. So the day length in December in Helsinki is about from 10 to 3, if that. So it's twilight all the time there in the winter. So it's a pretty short day, but we managed to find one. And as we were watching this thing, these two bird banders came along, and they were basically said, when you're finished taking pictures, we're going to try and catch this thing. And they must have been husband and wife, because it was the funniest thing to watch them unpack their gear, which consisted of a fishing rod with a fuzzy little mouse on the end of it and a weight. And they basically cast this thing out towards the owl and then reeled it in really slow, trying to convince the owl to, and then they had this net set up that they would, they didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of catching this thing. But anyway, so we sat there for almost a half an hour of birding time and watched them because it was so comical. I couldn't understand what they were saying. He was translating for me, but it was like, an old married couple bickering at each other, trying to get this thing off this power line to come down and eat their fuzzy mouse, but it just wasn't happening. So anyway.
It's probably the same look he gave them.
What's that? Yeah. So, this is a white ibis in Melbourne. So after a 16-hour Pan Pacific flight, nonstop on Air Canada, I needed a break. So I basically dropped my suitcase, got my camera, and went birding because we had a day of recovery before our meetings and stuff. So I went to this local park, a botanical garden, and I found these things. They were everywhere. So I thought, that's a pretty interesting looking bird. So I like to get kind of point of view photos. So I lay down on the ground and started taking photos of this thing, this ibis. And these two ladies with prams or strollers stopped and said, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I'm taking a picture of this bird that I haven't seen before." And they're like, "That white thing?" I'm like, "Yeah, the ibis, the white ibis." And they're like, "Oh, the bin chicken." And I'm like, "Bin chicken? Their things are bloody everywhere." And they're getting into the garbage, they're getting, it's like, so they're like seagulls. And they're like, "Yeah, like seagulls." So anyway, so just remember that, what might be a wonderful lifer for you is probably something that they see every day, and, just a different perspective. So we have four-legged friends as well as two-legged. So when you're out looking for birds, keep an eye on the up in the trees or on the ground. So I was looking for a king parrot in a national park in Australia, and along this road, and looked up, and there was koalas all over the place in the gum trees. So I'd seen them before, but it was still pretty cool. So that was a 3K day. It was the koala, the kangaroo, and the kookaburra, all within about a mile. So that was pretty neat. So ferries can be a great place to do birding. So I took a ferry from Auckland, New Zealand to an island that was actually a bird sanctuary, Tiri Tiri Matangi it's called, and scored 2 lifers on the trip. So this was a Pacific reef heron on the jetty, sitting there watching us, and then a flesh-footed shearwater that was out in the strait. So that was kind of fun. So the only guy that was outside on the ferry trip in the middle of the winter with my binoculars looking for birds. All the local Kiwis were huddling inside in the heated ferry. So again, this is another 4-legged critter. This is an African lion that was in South Africa. This was taken with about a 70mm lens. It was like right beside the car. So the message here is that if you find yourself traveling with a non-birder, setting expectation is key, otherwise things can get really nasty. So be clear that you're going to stop a lot, and unexpectedly, and back up, and go ahead and back up, and stay just 5 more minutes waiting for that bird or waiting for the shot. So be clear how long you're going to be out, how much driving you're going to do, what might go wrong, and be honest so that they can opt out if they choose, given the parameters. So don't tell them you're going to be out for an hour when you're really going to be out for the day. So one of my coworkers decided to come with me on this weekend journey to this game park in South Africa, and I basically sat him down a couple of nights before, and I said, "Look, this is how it's going to go." And I said, "I'm just full disclosure, And so he said, "Yeah, I understand it all. I'm in." And after the 2 days, he said, "That was the most unbelievable. Yeah, I was getting frustrated with you at times, but we saw some really cool stuff. I'm glad I went." but thanks for giving me the heads up. So make sure your family members or people that you're traveling with know what to expect. So this is a lilac-breasted roller, which was one of the neatest birds that I saw in South Africa. So I had my bird book with me and was able to identify it on the spot. I thought it'd be pretty unique, and it turned out it was. So also studying the book in advance can help you recognize species that you're interested in, and studying sounds. So here I've learned a bird by ear to know what to listen for, but when you go to a different place or a different country and you walk into the birding place, you don't recognize anything, and it can be quite daunting. Listening, getting to know some of the sounds, or at least familiarize yourself with the sounds to be able to narrow it down, can be really helpful. So this bad dude is a southern yellow hornbill. So animals that are used to being fed can get really cheeky. So this guy was sitting on the railing in a cafe in the middle of this park and was obviously used to getting fed or stealing food. So we were at one table and it was over at the next, and as soon as the waitress came with their lunch, this thing was on the table and in their food. And what are you going to do when the thing was, beak's that long, You're just going to back up. So I took this from the other table, because it literally jumped onto their like right onto their table, and they're probably the size of a big hawk or something, and that beak on them. Anyway, it's pretty funny. They look like a comic or like a Muppet or something. So this is a red-billed oxpecker. So some species you'll find are associated with wildlife. So in South Africa there was hoopoes, on dung piles, and there was those hornbills, and then of course the oxpeckers were. This guy was on a giraffe, but they were on the koodoos, and they were on water buffalo, and they were on all kinds of different species. But thought it was kind of cool that it was the most of the shot is giraffe neck, and then so they eat the ticks off of the other animals and the blood that's in them. So this is a fork-tailed drongo. So we were in this game park, and so within the park there's wild animals everywhere. So you're not allowed to get out of your vehicle. So we were driving around for 2 days, and every time we would see one of these things, they would fly. And they eat wasps, so they're just kind of a neat species. And I tried to get a picture of one, couldn't, and I was like, if I could just get out of the car, I could get one, but you just never know if there's a lion in the grass, so you want to stay in your vehicle, right? So anyway, patience is key, which is something that I'm not very good at. So after 2 days of trying to take a picture of one of these things, we were outside of the park, we were just in town, and sure enough, there's one sitting on the power line. So pulled over on the side of the road, jumped out of the car, and got a photo. So I was happy. So birds can turn up in the strangest places. So again, be prepared. So my last trip to Helsinki, a Eurasian oyster catcher, I was there in the summer. I really wanted to see one. Tried for 2 days, walked around all kinds of estuaries and places that you'd see these things, didn't find them. So after coming back from birding the whole day with my guide slash friend, one of my colleagues wanted to go for a walk around downtown Helsinki. So I said, great, let me grab my camera. So I had just a smaller lens on, and we were walking along this jetty. There was a fence, about 10 feet of wharf, and then the ocean. And there's just mew gull after mew gull, or common gull, I should say, lined up along this thing. And they weren't afraid because there was a fence, and they knew obviously that they couldn't be caught. And then there was this one blackfin, but it had its neck or its beak tucked in, and I was like, that's not a gull. So anyway, a ship went by and it beeped its horn, and this guy, stood up, and I was like, wow, it's an oyster catcher. So, you just never underestimate what birds are going to do. They pretty much go where they want, and so I got to see one. I got to see it nice light, nice and close, and so yeah, Boy Scout motto: be prepared. All right, so contact me. So on Facebook, my profile is public, and I share pictures from around Nova Scotia and around the world. So you don't have to be my friend to see my stuff. You can just look me up. If you want notifications about when I post, then send a friend request, and I just do it. I also moderate a group called the Nova Scotia Birders Around the World for people from Nova Scotia to share their travel birding photos and experiences. Yeah, like I said, it's about 120 or 130 users right now. Also use Instagram, and then my email address, jason.dane@outlook.com. So yeah. Questions or discussion?
Put that last slide up for a minute, please.
Yeah, sure.
What's been your favorite birding trip out of all of them?
Favorite birding trip? Question. I'd have to say, I think the Australia-New Zealand trip that I did in May, I was down there for 2.5 weeks and I probably had 4 full birding days. Yeah, I think the one day in Australia I had over 100 species, none of them I'd ever seen before. And that was in their winter time, so I can't imagine, you know, how much better it would be in the summer. And we saw the this one species, the red-bellied parrot. There's only 15 of them left in the wild, and they're trying to bring them back. And anyway, at this place in Melbourne, it's kind of a secret that they're there. So the guide took me there, and he said, like, you can't tell anybody where this is, but anyway, there was one there, and there was 2 there actually, so we got to see them, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, any other questions for Jason? I can say that, you know, just by his generosity of providing as much information for anyone who's traveling outside of Nova Scotia, he's just in 2 or 3 years, he's got so many connections all over the place, and very generous to share all of this with us. So a great resource to have, and certainly anybody that is traveling, make sure you join the Facebook page if you're on Facebook and contribute to that as well. Are there any other questions for Jason at this point? As you know, we're all going to be meeting here, and please stay as long as you wish. Thank you very much, Jason. Go. The last feature.